Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 150 of Retro Power Uncut. Feels like a milestone. It was good to catch up with one or two, probably viewers, certainly, definitely viewers at Retro Rise Gathering. It was a lovely time. Drank too much cider, had a bit of a headache, but it was very good. Some very, very awesome cars there, and just good to meet lots of people and have the annual catch-up, or biannual catch-up if you go to the Retro Rise Weekender at Goodwood as well, which I did this year. So yeah, all good. And anyway, we will move on with workshop things, and we're going to start with the Project Churchill Jag, which if I reverse, we can see what's been going on. You saw the very early beginnings of it last week, and this side is basically done now in terms of the metal. Tom's done a beautiful job. He has fabricated this in sections, which he's then grafted together. He's then aligned them on the car, worked out the exact positioning. He's then planished up this section of wing here. This normally sits a lot flatter than this. This section is actually quite slab-sided, and this section here is quite slab-sided. Probably won't show very much on camera because it's quite subtle, but what he's done is generally planished up this area, stretched it to give slightly more shape to the general part of the wing. And then he's got the wheel arch that he's made using pull max, hand tools, etc. Located in place, scribed round it, trimmed it to shape, then scribed round it, left some tabs on it, which is then screwed to the wing in various places around there to hold everything in place. As I say, then done a final scribe line round, trimmed both halves to the scribe line, got that tacked in place, planished up the tacks, then trimmed off the tabs, tacked those areas up, planished that up, and fully welded it and planished it all up, and it's looking pretty good. We've now got wheel clearance where we need wheel clearance, and a shape that we're pleased with, that kind of tallies up with the rear wheel arch shape, and all just looks really nice. So yeah, really happy with that. And he's now moved on to the other side, so he's making up the sections for the other side. He's paused for a minute because he was doing some anvil work, just doing some stretching on the anvil, so he's actually paused for a minute so he can do the video. But he's just making up the sections to graft together to do the wheel arch to the other side. That's the current mission. Also on this, Stu's been doing various bits of work. Some of the slightly less photogenic stuff, which is all extremely important as well. That's what this fitting's lying here for, is that he's been working on the aircon compressor plumbing and various other plumbing, some of the fuel plumbing at the rear of the car, but also the aircon plumbing at the front, which has become a reasonably complicated task, as it usually does, trying to find ways in for the fittings. I don't know if that's done up. It probably is too done. Yeah, I can't really get that fitting out of there, but basically he's fabricated an elbow for this morning. We needed a fill port elbow in the circuit, obviously, and it was very difficult to find a place for a fill port that was actually going to be accessible. Underneath the wings, really not where we wanted to put it, and anywhere in the engine bay ends up down right nestling next to the exhaust manifold. So he's had a bit of a to and fro on working out what routing to send the plumbing, and then actually he's made up a long 90-degree fill port, a 90-degree bulkhead fill port elbow, so that we can screw a flexi pipe onto the bulkhead end of that 90, comes through the inner wing here and comes out behind the headlight down here. You can probably just see the pipe work there, which then goes through to the dryer and then goes through to the condenser. It's made up a 90-degree fill port elbow. That goes through the wing with the fill port on the top, just down here, just by the corner of the engine, so it's easily accessible. And then the swage fitting straight after that for a flexi line to then loop down and back and arrive on the fitting on the back of the compressor, and still just clear the chassis rail down there, clear the exhaust manifold, and also clear the power steering pump, which on these is shaft driven. Off the front timing case on the engine, there's a shaft drive back, which picks up the distributor on its way. Not that it's a distributor, it's actually a cam phase sensor on these, but it passes that and then comes back and drives the power steering pump, and we need access to get the feed pipes to that as well. So he's dodged all of that, quite fiddly, but it's all done now. So that's all coming along quite well. So yeah, still quite a bit more metal finishing. I know a couple of guys spoke to Tom at the show at the weekend actually, and were commenting about the quantity of metal finishing involved on this, and yeah, he's just battling through it. He's moving on nicely. So we will do the same and move on to the Honda, or Allegro, depending on what you want to call it. Bobby has picked up where I left off on the dash and done the hard bit. Basically, he has been fabricating the support structure for this. We did a bit of a conflab and to and fro on exactly the mounting height for the dash. There are a couple of limiting factors on that, so there's only so many places we can put it. It would have been nice to have mounted it lower from a point of view of visibility of instruments. However, we can't mount it low because there's a steering column in the way, and the instrument visibility is dictated by the height of adjustment of the steering column. So with the wheel adjusted right up, the instrument visibility is pretty good, but if you adjust it down, it's not. But that's not unusual for an awful lot of road cars anyway, so I think we can cope with that. Last week I'd obviously done this extension of the original metalwork of the dash. We've dispensed with, I mentioned it last week, but we've dispensed with the original structure that supported this dash in the Allegro, because A, because it was in the wrong place, and B, because it was just a bizarre bit of fabrication. I don't know why they did it the way they did it. I suspect it was originally designed to be different, and then it got revised and they just didn't change the metalwork because it would have involved changing a press tool, which they didn't really want to do. So we've binned all that, and Bobby's fabricated a tubular support structure with small brackets that pick up all the studs behind the metalwork. This dash is made of a foam encased metal structure. It's actually a galvanized steel inside there that's then been encased in foam. And that has various welded studs on that internal metalwork that originally mounted to the weird pressed dash structure. So Bobby's now put a tube through there. He's bent up a tube in the tube bender. That's 7/8 inch 16 gauge tube. He's rolled the middle section, bent the ends in the tube bender, and then fabricated a set of tabs to pick up all the original mounting studs that are on the original Allegro dash. And he's then fabricated some sort of cantilever pylons, if you like, that come off the rear face of the scuttle panel in here, and they then carry the studs on the back of this that then carry that whole dash structure. It's all nice and rigid, plenty rigid enough now for the dash top. There's a lot more to go in underneath it, but that's plenty rigid enough now. Looks really good, and we've talked through a plan. We've got a plan of how that's all going to be trimmed, how the ends are going to be closed in. So Bobby's then fabricated around that plan in order to be able to fit that. So that's looking really good. The second sort of edge to that part of the car, mixing the people that are working on it a little at this point. Luke, or Fenton as we call him, has been working on the interior. We needed some basic scan work doing for the design of the dash. Now obviously we've got the Allegro upper dash section, but all of the rest of the dash area is being done from scratch. And we need to do that on CAD basically. The further we go along, the less we try and do stuff on the fly, and the more we just draw it all. And certainly there are going to be a number of parts that will need machining, either in foam or 3D printing in plastic, ready for trimming. There's various work needs doing there to make the substructure parts, and all of those need a CAD drawing really to pin them down and work out exactly the shape of everything, and be able to have drawings to machine substrate materials from and do 3D printing from. So to that end, Luke has had the scanner out earlier today and put the seat in, steering column in and dash in, and the rear seats in, and done an interior scan of the car as it sits, so that we can, the other thing is the inner quarter cards. It's another point. We've got to draw up the inner quarter cards, because I think we'll probably do them in composite, but we've got to make moulds for those to be able to make them in composite. And in order to do that again, the cleanest, easiest way of doing that is going to be to do a drawings to machine the mould, or at least the book from. So again, the scan work is valuable in a number of areas. So Luke's been doing the scan work, that's done. I'll move briefly to the back. Bobby is finishing off some work on the boot lid, in that he'd done the boot lid hinges, but he's now making the gas struts on he's now fitting the gas assist struts on the hinges, just to assist with the boot lid opening. He's just been getting those sorted at the moment. Obviously we're making modified hinges, so these are a mock-up, but he's making the mock-up so that he can mount the gas struts onto the car side, onto the underside of the parcel shelf, so that when we have the final boot hinges, the moving part of the boot hinges, and they'll have the other fixing for the gas struts on, then they'll have something to attach to at the car end. So Bobby's working on with that. And then I've been doing a few minutes, albeit not as many minutes as I'd perhaps like to have done, on the front end, which was, that radiator's just thrown in at the moment. That's an EK9 Civic radiator, which we're going to use, which will do the job very nicely. We're not actually going to use this one. This is a mock-up. We're actually modifying it very slightly in a couple of places. It doesn't. The core dimensions and structure of the radiator are fine. The peripheral bits are not. We're going to modify the peripheral bits on this one, and then this will be used as a dummy radiator to send to Concept Racing for them to make the final proper ones, because they'll be a lot nicer than that. And then the other problem we've been addressing is the air conditioning. Is quite a tricky one, which is the air conditioning condenser. Slightly weird thing we found is that the two Integras that we started with, one had originally had air conditioning and one had not originally had air conditioning. And those familiar with the car know that there's a bracket which carries the air conditioner and is also an engine steady. It's a combined job. Now on this engine, which came out of the first Integra we stripped down, that bracket was aluminium. And it was only when we looked at some aftermarket compressors, the Sandon type that we generally use on most of our builds. That wasn't going to fit in the space, so we actually ordered from somebody on eBay a used Honda DC2 compressor so that we will just rebuild. We'll rebuild that with new internals and reuse it. However, when we went to fit it, we found that the aluminium bracket doesn't have, the holes are not tapped in it, and that compressor doesn't fit that bracket. So it's very strange in that the Integra without air conditioning had a bracket for an air conditioner that a DC2 air conditioner doesn't fit, and none of the holes are drilled or tapped in it. So I don't know if anybody can shed any light on that slightly odd one. We can only assume that the original plan by Honda was to use a different air conditioner. They changed plan to use this type, and then didn't modify the bracket on the cars that didn't have air conditioning. They maybe just kept the original design of bracket. But the other weird thing is that the original bracket's aluminium and nice and light, and the bracket for the air conditioner models looks to be either cast iron or cast steel. I suspect it's cast steel, and is horrendously heavy. So a bit of an odd one, but anyway, there we go. The air conditioning compressor fits, the condenser does not fit. Again, going through our sort of catalogue of aftermarket condensers, none of them are anywhere near fitting in the space we've got available. So I started doing the trawling through OEM condensers, which is a pretty dull job, and again ended up at EK9 in that the EK9 condenser fits on the back of the EK9, on the front, sorry, of the EK9 radiator, and is consequently really small. Now I can't find a smaller condenser than the EK9 Honda one. Again, I'd love to be enlightened. If anybody can suggest a car that was originally fitted with a really compact condenser, then let me know. And also, likewise, we're just sort of following up at the moment, but doing 10 jobs at once, trying to find a UK manufacturer for very low volume, stroke 1 or 2 off, air conditioning condenser units. We have several suppliers of radiators and of radiator cores and of plate and bar cooler cores and various things. You know, there's several in the Midlands very close to us. But none of them, to my knowledge anyway, manufacture air conditioning condenser type cores, which is subtly different. They're a brazed core that is tube and fin. So a bit like making the core of a radiator, only that it has the end tanks brazed into it. Not many of them, none of them to my knowledge do that, but we're doing a bit more research on that. But I'll be guided, if anybody knows anybody in the UK that makes tube and fin brazed complete condenser unit or cooler units with the end tanks brazed in, and let me know. I'd be interested to hear. But anyway, that's the ongoing. But it does basically the EK9 unit does fit, but the ports are totally unfavourable. We need to modify the ports, and the ports are brazed to the unit. So I can't get them off. Those units are furnace brazed, so they're impossible to modify. Yes, I could drill and TIG weld and things, but I risk damaging the core. It would be better to get a core made with the ports in the right place. So that's where we're at with that. And then, yeah, you know, we're getting through the dry build stages. We're pretty well into it. There's not too many hours. There's a lot, obviously, but not a ridiculous number of hours left to getting this to the stage where we really do need the bodywork. And that's obviously some way away. The actual bodywork stage is some way away. So there we are. That's where we are on that. I'm going to nip over here because I can see a good explanation of where we're at on the E-Type. If I come over here, I can capture it all really. Sam's been working on the footwell ends. I don't know what you call it. There'll be a term in E-type terminology. Oh, actually, there's a sticker on it. There's a bulkhead toe panel left hand. So Sam's been fitting the bulkhead toe panels to the car and fitting the reinforcers that go with those and getting those welded into place. So that's installed on this side now, and the repairs, that in turn necessitated a load of repairs that we always expect them, but we hadn't technically foreseen them because I hadn't seen the rust holes. But he's found various unforeseen bits of rust we hadn't really noticed before and repaired those on the way. So while it sounds like it's taken a long time to fit a footwell end panel, there's quite a lot of steps before that of repairing all the bits it attaches to and getting all the holes blocked up that have rotted through the area in Jaguar fashion. So that's all repaired now. And then he's moved on to fitting some wiring acceptance sections in, where with the structure that we've done, there was not really a sensible way of getting wiring through these reinforcer tubes and keeping the reinforcer tubes as structural as we wanted at the ends. It would have meant putting significant holes through the structure where we didn't want to. So we've elected that, given that we've got plenty of room in the sill, we're going to run a secondary tube in stainless steel through the sill to put the wiring through. So Sam's just been fabricating these up. We've got some 1.25" 16 gauge stainless steel tubing. We bought some end fittings which we got about a week ago. Then he's got everything set up with 90 degree and 45 degree bends cut to suit at the ends, lengths of straight pipe in between, got all that set up and tacked up to fit in the space, made some flange washers to go on the ends of those, then purged it, tigged it all up, and then got that in place. And now he's just battling, this is hence the light through here, he's battling being able to weld this end in. We've got a plan there. I think he can weld the tube to the flange fine, and we just can't weld all of the flange. But to be honest, it doesn't need all welding. It's not a structural part. He was just trying to be a perfectionist by welding all the way around. But realistically, it doesn't need welding all around. We're going to carefully tack weld around those ends and then seal them in. So beyond that, there's not really any need. And this is all inside the bulkhead end structure, stroke sort of door pillar, door hinge pillar structure. So it's pretty awkward TIG welding access, but he's getting there. He'll be able to get the pipe welded into the washer on the end. It's just, as I say, it's just getting the actual washer attached, but tacking that in will be more than enough to stop it moving. He's just going to make some little braces, basically, some little plates, some little scallop plates that sit, probably 3 of those that are going to sit along here to just mount this pipe to this pipe, just to keep everything solid so it can't break off and crack and vibrate and cause a nightmare later on by vibrating around inside the sill, which would be a bad thing to happen. So that's what Sam's working on there. And then moving on, I'm going to run at the camera and then run off this way. We are moving forward with, I'm going to just move this airline out of the way. Now I can send that aloft. I'll send that up out the way. I enjoyed Mark's demonstration last week as well, by the way. That was it was very good. I noticed a couple of amused comments on that, and I was yeah, it was very good. Scott has been in between doing other welding jobs for some exhaust fabrication in the assembly shop. Scott's been moving on with the rot repair. He's got the rot repair pretty much tied up on this side now, the other side pretty much there. Yeah, he's got the welds to dress, but we wanted to make we wanted to feel like we'd step forward a little bit and get this body shell lined up. So we've got that, I've dropped a tube in that earlier that we could sling it off at the balance point, which is conveniently right next to the B pillar. So we've just tack welded a bit of tube in to sling it off. Got that slung up on there, and then Scott's just doing all the same job we did before, which is all the various trimming and grinding back on all the edges and getting everything tidied up and moved into where it needs to be able to position the Allegro body over the Honda floor pan in exactly the right place. Once that's in exactly the right place, we can make the tabs that will bolt the body on, the temporary tabs. Mentioned it on the last one, but we basically put a temporary tab on the bottom of each A pillar, a temporary tab on the bottom of each B pillar, and then a brace that goes across the shell under the rear windows on the rear inner quarter panel, with a tab down to the original seat back mounts on the Honda floor pan. And with those 6 points mounted, then we know that we can take the body off and put it back on, take it off, put it back on. It always goes to the same place, always sits on those 6 brackets. So once we've done the initial tape measuring, scratching our heads and walking around and around in circles trying to work out where it all goes, we don't have to do it again. It always goes on those same 6 bolts. The holes are all drilled on side, so there's no movement in anything. So every time we take the body off and put it back on, which is probably, it'll probably come off and on like 10 or 15 times, I imagine, one way or another during the process. It always goes back in the same place. Then when we're all finished, those temporary mounting points, in the case of the tabs, get removed. Obviously, in the case of the seat mounts, they're staying because we're using the Integra rear seats, and then the brace just gets ground off from the inner quarters. No one would know they're ever there, and the shells all become one by that point. Interestingly, I did a little weighing operation on the metal that was removed. Remember, this isn't including the doors and the tailgate and the bonnet, which were removed from the Integra, and they're massively heavier than their equivalent components on the Allegro. But I just did a weigh-in because we were getting rid of a load of scrap. I did a quick weigh on the material, the bits of metal that were removed from the Integra shell. And we removed 144 kilograms of steel from the Integra body shell, which is quite significant lightening. We are going to weigh the Allegro replacement for that material just to see, plus all the material we've added, just to get just out of curiosity really, just to see what the weight comparison will be. But it's going to be a light car. It's going to be a lightweight car, and it's interesting in that I would say that just the floor pan on the Integra appears, without having done a proper torsional test, but just from handling it in the workshop, I would say that the Integra floor pan, even without the body on top of it, has more torsional integrity than the entire Allegro shell did originally. It's quite shocking how torsionally floppy the Allegro shell was. It's really not very good at all. So I would say it's going to be massively stiffer than the Allegro ever was, yet massively lighter than the Integra was. So it'd be interesting to see. We'll wander through to body prep then, where we're going through panel alignment fun. Fun's one word anyway. Gaz is nestled over at the back there doing some Escort door prep. Is that? Yeah, it is Escort, isn't it? Yeah. Gaz is just doing the final prep of the epoxy primer on the second Mk1 Escort build doors, which is one on the stand there, and the second one is just prepping there. And then Steve and Mark are just starting doing the blocking work on the epoxy on the Chevette estate. I keep forgetting, I forget everything, too old. This was epoxy. When was this epoxied? I lose bloody track. What day was this epoxy? Was this? Yeah, it was Friday. It was Thursday, wasn't it? Yeah, this was epoxied on Thursday last week, so just about as we were filming last week. So they're just getting that block now, but we're also doing, towards the front end of the car, doing the panel fit up of the doors and the wings, which is being as challenging as it generally is on these cars. The doors, there's a few little adjustments needed. There's a couple of bits of damage on the doors that we mentioned before, but the wings are aftermarket wings, and the fit of the wings is fairly appalling. All Chevette and Cadet aftermarket wings that I've ever come across fit appallingly badly. So we're just working on improving that. So we've done some welding up, some build-up weld along the back edge of the wing on the near side. I don't think we're going to have to do it on the off side, but on the off side, the reinforcer is holding the wing away from the car too far to line up with the door. So we've had to do some adjustment there, some bending and tweaking and general hammering and dollying of the wing to get the whole line moved in a bit. Plus the lines along the wing are a little bit not ideal, but we'll get there. It's just a lot of 2 steps forward and 2 steps back again, getting things to line up there. But it's progressing. So that's where we are in there. And then this morning, Gaz was doing the underside Raptor. I think last week we saw the inside Raptor. This morning, Gaz was doing the underside Raptor on the second Mk1 Escort, the Project Kuma Escort, which is now resident in the paint booth here and resplendent in its white underside now. You remember this is a tough coating. It's not a upper half visual coat, so the textured finish is exactly what's being aimed for on the underside. And that's, just to reiterate, we talk about it every time, but that is zinc metal spray. The car's blasted after metal work, then it's zinc metal sprayed. It's then primed with an epoxy primer, and it is then Raptor, coated in U-Pol Raptor, which is a very tough, extremely everything resistant coating. We've used it for a lot of years now. I keep reading around, floating around, odd comments on Facebook, and I see a few comments on on the internet in general about, oh, Raptor's brittle and it comes off and it chips easily, and that's absolutely not our experience with it. Our experience is that it's incredibly tough, incredibly chip resistant, and it most certainly does not come off. And bear in mind, we've used this on a Safari rally car that's now done, I believe, 4 East African Safari rallies, and it's still the original coat of Raptor on the underneath. Now, yes, it has got some damage on it, but as extreme tests go, it doesn't get much more extreme than that. And you know, it stands up unbelievably well. So I would, in any case where there's a problem with this coating, I would say look at the preparation, not the coating, as being the issue. So yeah, that is now white Raptor underneath, Raptor's done inside. So next step, final paint. And on that note, I'll hand over to Cal, see where we are in assembly.
Cool, all right, I'm going to grab myself a Roundstone coffee from this exceedingly slow machine. So, Simon, Roundstone coffee, if you're listening, I'm going to go one step further. I poo-poo this lovely machine you've supplied to us, and I want a faster one. Speed, I need speed. Ungrateful little blighter. Right, whoa. Okay, so it was only a few days ago that coffee was more of a mandatory requirement for a number of us, because we were at Retro Rides gathering at Mallory Park, which turned out to be an absolutely awesome event. So Friday, quite a few, in fact we finished a little bit early Friday, quite a few of us went down to Mallory Park. Quite a lot of the guys were camping, and yeah, Friday night turned into what can only be described as the usual absolute carnage of alcohol and fire, with people burning themselves and generally getting into all sorts of predicaments. So safe to say we all had a great time. And then Saturday I was back here prepping some of the cars to take on the Sunday. So on the Sunday I took the Land Cruiser and the Morris over to Retro Rides. And I must admit the response was incredible. I wasn't really sure. I've been to Retro Rides a lot of times. It's a show I've always enjoyed. But I wasn't sure what the level of interest would be like. And it was absolutely off the charts. The cars were just swamped the whole time. And I was pretty much engaged with conversation all day except maybe 15 minutes. And a huge number of people saying, you know, love the videos, watch them every week. So yeah, thank you for those people who came and talked to me and said hello. I really enjoyed the day, so I think it's safe to say we'll probably be displaying some cars at some future ones as well. Anyway, moving on, Project 1 Escort. Anthony's been working on some of the stuff in the engine bay, so AC plumbing. We're basically looking at things we need to do before the engine goes in. So he's been crimping up the AC hoses, getting those in place. He's just been mounting the aircon dryer. I was just a minute ago, there was some swearing going on, which has died down now. It kind of surrounded the fact that, as a kind of pet hate of mine, when it comes to Jubilee clips or Mk1 clamps, if you spec them too big, they end up with a massive amount of thread sticking out in the case of Mk1 clamps, or a huge tail if it's a Jubilee clip, which I think looks terrible. Now our clamp for the AC dryer is basically a folded stainless panel with a Mk1 clamp spot welded to it. And he was cursing the downside of trying to size the clamps really accurately, is that he was really cursing trying to get the first thread in it, and struggling a lot, but he has now done that, so thankfully resolved that one. So yeah, bashing through some of that aircon plumbing, and then something else which I don't know if we showed you before, but certainly the bonnet was down the last couple of videos I think, is these machined hinges that we've done. So these were a Tarks design, which has turned out very nicely. Well done, Tarks. They have a little gas strut in, which isn't fitted at the minute, which will kind of hold the bonnet in the up position. But they're looking absolutely awesome. We just thought we'd trial fit them before we had them anodised, and they're good. So the other pair has gone away for anodising. And then when they're back, we'll swap them over. The anodised ones will go on here, and these ones will go away for anodising. So looking good in that respect. And then Luke has been finishing off the centre console. So last week I think we showed the design for that. We had 2 switches at the front, which are for hazard warning and the PDM reset. And we were a little bit tight on space. We just had a remodel of the switches, and the space for the back of the switch was a bit tight. So what we decided to do, So I've reassess it again and put the switches in forwards at the front of the sort of tray where your phone sits. So each side of the USB socket. So they're just a little bit, well, they'll be actually more easy to press. It was originally looking like a tidier design visually, not to have anything else in that sort of phone tray, but in reality, from a practical point of view, they'll be easier to press, and there's room for the back of the switches. So better overall design, I think. And then Anthony's just on the door build-up at the minute, so we've got to get these sort of dividers in here that sit between the glass, and then we've got new glass throughout, so the window channels that sit on the bottom of the glass need bonding onto the glass. So what we're doing is a full mock-up build of the glass with everything in there, so we can just make sure the positioning of everything is right, and then we'll get the channels bonded on, and then we can get all that lot in the car for the final time. So yeah, door builds, always a traumatic one that it's nice to get through to the end of usually. I don't know why, but they always seem to be a pain. Morris, so as I mentioned a minute ago, we took this to Mallory Park at the weekend. Went down extremely well, but this also gave me the opportunity to get more miles on it. And yeah, so far so good. I think last week I mentioned we'd just done the differential swap, and I'd taken it for a quick nip down the road, and it was all looking good. But yeah, doing more miles on it now, still performing well. I just need to get some miles on this and keep getting out in it as much as I can, and then we'll be ready to hand it over, the big handover. And then yes, in terms of cars at Mallory, I think last week we'd just been out with Dave Rowe mapping this, so I kind of showed that little shot of it firing up the road. I've now driven it to Mallory, which is the second time essentially I've driven it any distance, and so far pretty good. I don't think there were any leaks to report. It continued to be pretty refined in there. Transmission was performing well, engine was performing well. It continues to have a slightly kind of wandery, sort of bouncy ride. Well, not bouncy, it's not the right description, but you can tell there are chunky tyres on it, and you can tell it's on leaf springs. And it's quite funny when I'm sort of chopping from something like the Morris, which is incredibly precise in its handling, to something like this. Your immediate reaction is to be quite critical of it, but then you've got to step back and try and create a benchmark in your mind for what the expectation is on what was essentially almost an agricultural vehicle originally. And actually, from a control perspective, you know, the weight of the controls, the brakes, the throttle, the steering, the refinement in the cabin, it's actually extremely good. It's just the sort of precision of sort of movement control, trying to word this carefully, is not on the levels of a motorsport build. But nonetheless, it's absolutely fantastic thing. It drew a massive crowd at Mallory, I have to say. I was unsure, because although we've done an incredible amount of detail engineering on it, you know, in terms of all the parts, the details in the engine bay, it's all kind of super subtle, you know, almost sort of as if it was like that originally, and you sort of think, oh, people will probably just pass it by, but it had a continuous crowd around it the whole day, sorry. So that was really nice to see. And now we're just tickling through some jobs. As a result of my having done a few miles in it now, I've sort of started to formulate the list, the point that Morris was at probably a couple of months ago, where I'm just starting to kind of write down niggles and work through them. So one of them was the fuel pump. I thought was a bit too intrusive noise-wise in the cabin. It's in one of the tanks that are under the seats. In fact, it's literally under the driver's seat. There's a little bit too much noise transmission, so we've taken the seat panelling off to try and basically sound deaden the fuel tank, sound deaden that whole enclosure more. We had put some sound deadening in, but we're going to put a load more in just to try and knock down that fuel pump noise. Now it's weird actually. The last thing I expected was for the cabin to be refined enough that the noise of the fuel pump would be intrusive, but it's actually surprisingly quiet in there. So we're going to do that, and then as a secondary thing, I'd noticed a little bit of a fuel smell. If we'd left it with the windows up for a while, a little bit of a fuel smell in there. Now, what appears, having taken the covers off the tanks, what appears to be the case is that the fuel filler hose that we've used, so there's one piece between the filler neck and the tank, and then there's one that links the two tanks, it seems to not be responding that well to the fuel. Now, it's Mocal fuel filler neck hose, which we've used before. I don't know if there's a dodgy batch. I'm not really sure at the minute. It's kind of gone a lot softer than it was when it was installed, and there is definitely, although it doesn't stink of fuel, but there's a noticeable vapour through the barrier of it, through the wall of it. This kind of links into something we've battled with a bit before. In many years gone by, we learnt the lesson of different standards on rubber fuel hoses, which we don't often use these days, but there are sometimes instances, in fact there is on this, because we've got a Venturi pump picking fuel out of the secondary tank and adding it to the main one, and that pump was only available with push-on spigots, not threaded, so we've got some push-on rubber pipe in there. Now years ago we learnt this sort of lesson on not necessarily believing the grade that's written on hoses, because there's different standards. R6 is definitely allows a fair amount of fuel permeation. R9 is supposedly, for current standard unleaded, the one to go for won't allow, or allows a very, very minimal amount of fuel to permeate through the wall. And at the time we were buying some R9 hose from a local supplier, and we were convinced that it was not up to spec because it kept going slightly soft and smelling. And we actually did our own tests. We looked up the details for the SAE tests for that hose and carried out the tests where we basically bunged a piece of hose of X amount of weight and saw what percentage of weight of fuel it lost over a series of weeks and months, I think even. To measure the permeation, and it was miles out. I mean, it was like lower than R6 level. Now, the learn from that was that we always went with known branded R9 hose. So I think Kodan is what we've used on this, which there seems to be no problem with that. This is basically all a bit looping back to the fact that I suspect that Mokal fuel filler hose is not up to spec. Now, I would not normally badmouth anything about Mokal's products, so I suspect it's actually a defective batch. So I'm going to contact them and let them know about that, because certainly it doesn't seem to be doing what it should be doing. Unfortunately, there aren't that many other options. Now, I have here the hose that I'm going to try in its place, which is much less easy to work with. It's incredibly stiff. It's generally sold as marine grade fuel fill hose. It is nitrile rubber, as is the Mokal stuff, or supposedly. So we'll see how we get on. But this is just another example, as those sort of follow this long term will know. A lot of the battles we come up against are just products not really being up to scratch, which is frustrating, because you use what are generally considered to be the optimum products in certain situations, and yet even with that thought process of trying to choose the right things or the best things there, you still come a cropper with things not really being up to spec. So that's what I'm working on at the minute on this, is replacing that filler hose to try and minimise any fuel smell through that, sound deadening the enclosure while we're at it, so that we knock down some of the fuel pump noise, and I think at that point I'll be back out on the road getting more miles on it, so that's the next step on that. And then I think the only other thing to mention would be Camaro, where James has just about finished the exhaust system. So it's been, you would think a V8 would be a fairly, sort of muscle car would be a fairly simple exhaust system. In reality, not the easiest one. I might just actually, if you just spin around, I'll go over here. Follow me around here. Now, the problem area is at the back here, where under the middle of the car, it's relatively straightforward. We're trying to keep we've gone towards the centre, towards the tunnel, so we can keep the pipes slightly higher than the floor pan level, where the floor drops down in the rear footwell. 2 boxes in here, no problems with there really. Coming over the axles, again, reasonably straightforward. You'll notice we've taken the springs off so that we can put the axle at full bump and also articulate it. We've got a big stand over there, so we can kind of put the stand on the one side and the other side, articulate it in all directions and make sure it clears at all axle positions. The tight bit is actually here, where you've got the fuel tank in the way. We want to get down to this area here, and where we've come over the axle, you've then kind of got this choice of under the pan hard rod or over the pan hard rod, but going under it in a position that allows the axle to go to full droop and the pan hard rod to be in its lowest adjustment position then results in the exhaust being ridiculously low. And it would just be nicer to go above it, but you've still got then this problem of coming through and out to the side in front of the fuel tank. So that's been the area that's tight. And we were going to have V-band clamps throughout on this, but we've actually changed our mind on this and got a slip joint on this one so that we can have a really slimline connection on the exhaust here. and the areas where it's tightest between the fuel tank and the panhard rod mount. But it's looking good. He's just about there with it, so I think Scott's just doing all the final welding on the sections. Then we'll do a final fit up of it all, make sure we're happy with it, and at which point we should be good to get it on the ground. And I'm kind of hoping that might coincide not too badly with the wiring loom for the engine wiring loom being finished by Speartech, but we'll watch this space on this. And I think, speaking of watch this space, that's probably going to be it for this week. So on that note, we'll see you next week for more car-related swearing.